some cases, what looks like telepathy or mind reading might actually be something closer to like heightened emotional awareness or just extraordinary pattern recognition or sensory sensitivity. But to anybody listening or anyone who's actually had a real life experience of what's being explored in this podcast, there's clearly something bigger going on, right? Something sacred, something beautiful, something impossible to explain through the usual materialistic channels or lens is happening. And for the actual families who've lived through the slow and a lot of times painful road of uncovering their loved ones' hidden gifts, often loved ones that everybody else had just like written off as completely empty or mentally and physically incapacitated and beyond help. This is not a theory for them, right? This is real life. So welcome, everyone. Welcome to our 5th exploration in our Free to the Public 6-part series where Matthew and I find creative and inspiring ways to connect the dots between the Dream Arc and the Gene Keys and just life in general here on planet Earth. In our first 4 segments or parts, we explored aspects of the relationally oriented Venus sequence and the prosperity-oriented star Pearl. And we did so through a uniquely Dream Arc-ish lens. So just really quick, part 1 was called Dreaming Fantasy and the Teenage Mind. Part 2 was called From Cubs to Lions, How Our Childhood and Relationship to Animals Impact Our Emotional Intelligence and Resilience. Part 3 was called Ram-Inspired Strength, Cultivating Stability and Staying Grounded in a Shifting World. And part 4 was called Surviving the Bull Shift, Why We Need Artists, Dreamers, and Sacred Fools. And today we've called in something into the conversation, which we have a feeling you're going to really enjoy, which is the Dream Arc and the telepathy tapes, a new language of connection. So together we're going to be doing a little dance between the Dream Arc, the relating sphere of the Star Pearl, and this amazing podcast, right, called the Telepathy Tapes, which I bet many of you already heard of, that has taken the world by storm and revealed seemingly impossible intuitive capacities in non-speaking autistic children and adults. So I'm going to share also, I just want to say, a very personal decision that's pretty big and is going to impact my relationship with all of you in the Dream Arc going forward. So please stick around for that as well. It's going to be quite a ride that we're all going through. But first, we'd love to hear from you. So let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. Feel free to let us know how long you've been aware of the Dream Arc. We'd love to know if you've explored the Star Pearl yet, or if you've heard of the telepathy tapes before. Yeah. Okay, so we welcome you all so much, and we're just going to jump right into the conversation and see where it leads us, because we've got a lot to cover today, including my personal share. And we'll share some questions for you along the way to just support your journey, whether you're a participant in the Dream Arc course or curious about the Gene Keys or just kind of stumbling into this video serendipitously. So here's a question for everyone. Whenever you happen to be watching the video, just to kind of warm us up to the theme. Have you ever, and this is for you too, Matthew, have you ever sensed something that was true without being able to explain how you knew it? And what did you do with that knowing? So if something comes up for you now, just feel free to share the essence of your experience in the comments. But if not, just kind of place that question in your contemplative pocket, right? So you might suddenly have a memory in the coming hours or days, or you may actually have a new experience where your intuitive hunch is proven true, like a new experience. So just stay open to that. Okay, so now we're kind of warmed up, and I'm going to start sort of meandering my way into today's topic. Most people on the planet can sense or are maybe experiencing that we're living in a time of huge change and transformation. We talk about this all the time in Gene Keys territory and Dream Arc territory. And a lot of the time when we talk about change, we're referring to kind of environmental changes, political changes, economical changes, technological, cultural changes. But we're also talking about changes that are happening in the very fabric of how we understand consciousness and communication and connection. And for many of us, this is not like a change that we're just reading about, right? It's a change that we're actually experiencing and seeing wherever we look, right? So we might see or sense this kind of change in the way that systems are breaking down, or in the way that neurodivergent diagnoses are kind of skyrocketing. And we also get hints of these deeper changes in the conversations that we have with our friends, with our clients, with students who are expressing more and more of a really deep longing to connect in an authentic way, in an intuitive way, in their relationships and in their lives. So just think about the growing popularity of teachers like Richard Rudd and bodies of wisdom or systems like the Gene Keys and all the people, right, who are now kind of openly working with plant medicine and kind of bringing back an embrace of indigenous wisdom and psychedelics. Think of all the podcasts that are featuring psychics and channels and astrologers and embracing kind of the invisible or multi-dimensional perspectives and celebrating increasingly intuitive and symbolic and embodied ways of knowing, right? So ways of knowing that as in general, a good chunk of the human population have forgotten, but have always been with us. And that's kind of where the dream arc comes in, right? It's not here to hand anybody this like fixed roadmap or answers to their lives. It's more like this multifaceted portal or invitation to tune into life, right? And to tune into our relations, all our relations, right? And to listen differently, with more than just our ears, more than just our intellect. The dream arc really invites us to learn how to track energy and how to enter the mythical realms, one of Matthew's favorites. And it connects us to our own animal instincts and weaves together archetypes with dreams and symbols into our everyday lives. So the dream arc is really all about awakening in a very fun and synchronistic way and helping us access the kind of deep knowing that may not be easy to explain, but it is real. And so many indigenous peoples have known for eons. The dream arc reconnects us, just like them, with the energetic, relational, and alive intelligence that moves through everyone and everything, through the body, through nature, and through the kind of communication that isn't limited to just words, right? This is the cosmic life web that we often talk about, which brings me to the telepathy tapes. So ever since this podcast came out, it just like struck a chord in the collective and in me. And like I've mentioned before, if you haven't heard of the telepathy tapes, they essentially explore the lived experiences of non-speaking autistic people. Many who are communicating with their family members, with their teachers, and even with each other, even when they live in opposite parts of the country and have no explainable way of even knowing that each other exists, in the most remarkable and telepathic and intuitive ways. Now, I'm not going to get into the details because I don't want to spoil anything for you, because truly this podcast is worth listening to, and your own experience will just literally have you on the edge of your seat. But what I do want to say is that it is challenging a lot of assumptions about language, about intelligence, and about consciousness itself. So this isn't really just a podcast. It's kind of like a cultural catalyst that's arising at just the right time. Now, the podcast producer is Kai Dickens, and she said something that really struck me. And it was something like, if what the families were saying is true, this research could completely shift our paradigm on how humanity sees itself in consciousness. Now, of course, in some cases, what looks like telepathy or mind reading might actually be something closer to like heightened emotional awareness or just extraordinary pattern recognition or sensory sensitivity. But to anybody listening or anyone who's actually had a real life experience of what's being explored in this podcast, there's clearly something bigger going on, right? Something sacred, something beautiful, something impossible to explain through the usual materialistic channels or lens is happening. And for the actual families who've lived through the slow and a lot of times painful road of uncovering their loved ones' hidden gifts, often loved ones that everybody else had just like written off as completely empty or mentally and physically incapacitated and beyond help. This is not a theory for them, right? This is real life. And for many of them, it's also incredibly vulnerable because in a lot of cases, speaking about their experiences publicly has meant being ridiculed and dismissed, even accused of lying. And yet, these incredibly brave parents, and then the teachers, and then the speech therapists, and eventually the doctors, and the scientists, and the researchers who've been consistently exposed to these amazing beings with these incredible capacities ultimately have to speak up because what they've seen they just can't ignore it, right? Even if what they've seen and experienced is pushing into territory that mainstream science wants to avoid or feels uncomfortable with. And my guess is that most of you who are drawn to the gene keys or the dream arc, or even the telepathy tapes are really comfortable with concepts like non-local consciousness or intuitive communication and spiritual insight. But these have not been easy topics for your average scientific institution, right? Which has been relatively stuck in this very kind of Descartian, I don't know how to say that, but like a very materialistic worldview for centuries. But again, like I said, things are changing. And there are a lot more people now who really want to understand the bigger picture of what it means to be human and what is our true potential. So while I was contemplating the telepathy tapes, I could not help but think about at least 3 communities who are all trying to make sense of what's happening here in relation to the autistic population. And for me, it seems there's clearly overlap between these communities. But a lot of the time, they don't speak to each other, or they end up kind of being pit against each other, which I think is a real shame because, in my opinion, we're really going to need all 3 perspectives and even more if we want to gain a holistic and inspiring understanding of what might be going on, right? So I'm going to try and just kind of like boil it down for you. So first, there's the environmental and medical advocates, right? So these are the parents, the teachers, the researchers, the doctors who are driven by personal experience and have noticed shifts in their children's development after certain kinds of exposures. And the exposure might be to a toxin or an antibiotic or an environmental stressor or an SSRI or a vaccine, right? And these people, they're not all saying or concluding the same thing, not at all, but they're all asking for honest, rigorous, nuanced research, right? They want to know the cause of the sometimes very extreme symptoms and the very real suffering that's taking place inside of their loved ones or their patients. And way too often, they are completely dismissed, right? They're silenced, they're censored, they're labeled unscientific conspiracy theorists. But their questions come from love. They're coming from a very deep and genuine desire to understand and protect and help to heal their children. Okay, so that's the first group. Then we have the supporters of the hidden gifts, right? So this is like the telepathy tape people, right? So they're focused not on causation, not on like why are all these autistic things happening. They're focusing on capacity, right? So they believe also through their lived experience that a lot of these non-speaking autistic people carry unique forms of absolute brilliance. And that if and when we can offer real trust and deep attunement, and we can listen and use the right tools to reach these sensitive and gifted beings, their inner worlds can come alive in unbelievable ways and they can serve all of us, right? Because they know something that we don't know. So for these people, this isn't like conceptual, right? They've seen it happen, they've lived it, and yet, like I said earlier, their stories are also marginalized because what they're saying defies what we think we know about disability or intelligence or consciousness, and about what can be proven and what can't be proven in the ways of the old scientific paradigms, right? And what's been allowed before. And then we've got the third group that I want to just kind of honor here, which are the visionaries of consciousness and evolution, right? So these are the mystics and the spiritual teachers. These are the futurists. These are people like Richard Rudd and Lee Harris and Pam Gregory and Zach Bush. And each their own way, they're all talking about the new human. Ra Uru Hu, right, the founder of the human design, predicted a long time ago that there would be a global mutation in consciousness that would reach its breakthrough point in 2027, right? And that it would show up as a rise of autism. So, though each of these teachers carry a unique perspective, they're all suggesting that what we are witnessing in terms of this rise in autism, that it's not a disorder, but rather it's a signal, right? It's the beginning stages of something new that's coming online for all of humanity. Now, I could go in all kinds of directions with what I'm talking about here, but because relating is one of the themes that we're really wanting to weave together today from the Star Pearl, I'd like to just acknowledge some of the relational challenges and potentials that these communities face with the mainstream world at large and between each other, right? Essentially, all three of these communities are dismissed, like I said, because none of their views fit the current paradigm. But maybe, just maybe, and this is my point, and I'd be curious to hear from you, Matthew, at some point, and anybody who's interested in this subject, maybe each of them is carrying an essential piece of the puzzle of the truth. And maybe if we want to understand ourselves even more deeply, we're going to need the rigor of science and the wonder of mysticism and the devotion of parents and the lived, like, emerging wisdom and experience of neurodivergent children themselves who are finally able to communicate in ways that we can understand. So, what if autism and everything that it's stirring up in the culture isn't here to divide us, but to unify us, right? To help us relate to each other with a sense of wonder and curiosity. And so, in a way, the Dream Arc and the telepathy tapes are pointing to the same thing, right? We need new forms of listening, not just with the ears, but with our whole being, and especially with our hearts, like a kind of listening that slows us down, that helps us transcend our conditioning and our biases and opens the field, right? And invites in the mystery. So maybe the question we should be asking isn't, is this provable? But how are we doing with the listening, right? Are we willing to listen? Are we entertaining something that we didn't believe could be possible before? Because when we do allow ourselves to cross over our habitual beliefs and that edge, whether that edge is the possibility that our scientific institutions or pharmaceutical companies and media have been captured and corrupted to such a degree that children are being harmed and no one is willing to acknowledge it, or the possibility that children who can't even speak have this incredible, mind-blowing telepathic ability that is challenging everything we've been taught to believe about the nature of reality, or the possibility that a whole new kind of human being is coming online and that that's going to change the entire future of humanity in this planet. So when we listen beyond our biases, we start to see that people who are being ridiculed might actually be onto something important, and that intelligence takes many forms, and that language is so much more than words, and that human connection is multidimensional, and it's a miracle, and that we're only just starting to remember who we are and what we're capable of, and to understand what we're becoming, right? So, okay, so that was my massive meandering that I just did there. And I'd love to hear from you, Matthew. And of course, anybody is free to comment as well if you feel inspired by something that I shared. And Matthew, you're always free to share whatever you want. But I did come with a few questions specifically for you on the topic in case you feel inspired to answer any of them. And of course, just trust your intuition because that's what this whole conversation is about. So my first question I thought I would ask you, and I actually have a feeling that other people would really enjoy this, is what's it like living with your wife, who you might want to tell other people about, and what's it like for her to live with you, given your own hyper intuitive capacities? I'd love to hear any telepathically related experiences that you might have had, and then anything you want to share about Rupert Sheldrake would be very welcome. I know he came up in one of our earlier conversations, so I thought I'd bring him up too, just in case it sparks something for you.
Thank you, Rosie.
I know that was a lot.
Awesome.
I did a big dance.
Yeah, it's a lot, and it's such a, I mean, you just have to tune in online to see the world that this is, what this is evoking on so many levels, and so many, in so many ways, and looking at how, yes, different groups are dismissed, and how we might dismiss other groups, like even outright dismissing the mainstream, world of it as well, is like, that's another dismissal that can happen. And where do I dismiss, because even in amongst the scientists that have come to some conclusions over there, they have both of them have been dismissed, but they have different perceptions on things. And so it's like, I think it's a whole fascinating piece. And I actually feel really called, and we haven't talked about this at all, so this is me kind of throwing it in there, but to call on a creature to support us all with this from the dream arc, and just see if there's some wisdom in there, but just to really honor that it can be stirring up all kinds of feelings and thoughts, and hearing this, and it can be stirring up an enthusiasm it's that Rosie's speaking to something inside of you that's like, oh yeah, there's something really resonant here, even if you haven't checked out the telepathy tapes. I haven't watched the whole thing. I've watched some of them and I've been really moved by what I hear. I've also heard some of the criticisms, and from those from the science world, and those from the philosophical domains. And so it's like, it's so interesting to find something that has stirred up the collective in such a way. And I think that there's some really valuable insights that we can each find in our own way. And as much as I love the science and that dives into this, because there's Rupert Sheldrake, and you spoke of the science institutions, and two that have really inspired me over the years have been HeartMath, who we've had some people in the Gene Keys community that are closely associated with HeartMath, and their work with sort of studying the collective heart field. And then Institute of Noetic Sciences, which somebody by the name of Dean Radin is a scientist. Some of you might be familiar with his work, and he's done a lot of studies on telepathy, and he's gathered together many of the studies on telepathy. And despite this, despite the volumes of research that he's brought forward, he has often been dismissed. And I'm not of the scientific mind enough to be able to speak to the criticisms that come forward, but I am able to speak to my own experiences of it. And so, Rupert Sheldrake is another one that has kind of come forward with some of his studies on telepathy. And we've come across Rupert Sheldrake in some of our previous conversations. He's brought through this idea of morphic fields, that these invisible fields that connect the past and the future, that connect the acorn to the oak tree. And when he has taken his studies further, he's looked at dogs in particular. And this is one that I can really relate to. My wife often knows when I'm coming home, not because I've texted her to say, or that she's picked up something telepathically, but because my dog is suddenly alert at the window. And it's usually about 5 or 6 minutes before I show up back at the house. And the same with her when she's returning. And this was something that he studied. He studied dogs who know when their owners are coming home. And so he looked at this over, he was watching videos of them, and I don't know how many dogs he was working. And of course, the critics came forward and that kind of thing. But I've definitely had those experiences enough with my dog to believe that there's something else going on there, and that this blending of my consciousness and their consciousness, and the level of trust, and in my relationships. It's not just my relationship. My wife is known for her work as a spiritual medium, and she has a deep, just very psychic gift in the work that she does, and in how she connects. And it's not something we ever discuss. I don't ask her for psychic input on everything that's going on in my life. But I don't want to make her work outside of her work in that way.
I would so do that, Matthew. She's
Yeah.
very lucky that you practice restraint. I'd be all over that.
Well,
Okay,
and it,
continue.
it's so funny because when people always ask me, what's it like living with a psychic? I'm like, well, we talk about the dishes, we talk about, cleaning the house, we talk about those things. Yes, we have our other discussions. And 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 I honestly think it's some of the more mundane things that we experience the telepathy around. I'll be at the grocery store and I'll just be suddenly, I'm gonna pick this up. And then I come home and she'll be like, I meant to text you. Could you grab some of that? I'm like, oh, okay, that's why I brought this home. And and so those are examples of that in some of the more mundane ways that we've had that kind of connection to one another, and that there's been moments of that. And I've had this in circles of friends too, especially when there's a real trusting connection between myself and the other, and that they too are somebody who's open to the non-local. But saying that, one of the most impactful times of my life, and I think I've talked about this before, was when I was a kid and I was involved in an accident. There was really a divine blessing in many ways, and I ended up in hospital. But the day that I ended up in hospital, my mom and dad had been with me all morning, and they got a call from my grandmother in Canada, and she said, "Is Matthew okay? Because I just had a dream about a little blonde boy." And my mom hadn't, she hadn't even thought to call my grandmother or anything like that. And so my grandmother and an aunt both had that impression at that time. So, it makes me think along these fractal lines, these energetic connections, these non-local kind of experiences we have with one another. So absolutely, telepathy is something that I've looked at the science and I've studied it, I've looked at the criticisms of it, and I've kind of at times thrown it all away just to live and to meet these people. My dad has worked with autistic children for most of his adult life. He would introduce me to autistic children when I was younger, and so he's seen the rise in the diagnoses, and his experience of it is that the ability to recognize these, and that it's out there in the modern lexicon. More people are knowing to have their kids checked for it, and so there's so many different factors in all of that. But that doesn't negate any of these experiences these mothers and children are having of connecting. And you know I totally can experience that in different ways. And I believe we will experience it more and more. And I do feel like something like the dream arc that calls us up into deeper connection with the world around us, that we start to notice these synchronicities, these patterns, these connections can be really insightful, and help us deepen into that trust in the non-local, such that we have even more of that experience of telepathy. And so I don't speak of this as an expert. I don't speak of this as somebody who's dived deep into the telepathy tape specifically, but as somebody who's studied the non-local, or that world for such a long time in my own consciousness. It's difficult to deny that there's things happening, and that these children are bringing so much forward, and at the same time a cautionary note around that too, as where we've the expectation and pressure that we end up putting on those kids, versus just allowing them to live their life, and to show their beauty in the way that they are here to do that. So if it's all right with you, Rosie, I would love to invite a dream arc animal guide. Is that all right if we invite one in for each
I
of
I I would love that, but I was actually thinking, Matthew, and just tell me if you don't agree. What about the dog?
Well, the dog is a really good one for it. It's a very natural one because it's
It's
already
a natural one, and you've already brought in Gracie, and I don't know. It just felt to me like your life brought it in as an oracle. So that would almost be my
okay. We can
suggestion.
do that. Should we call on the dog?
Yeah, let's call on the dog. And while we do that, I want to just thank you for doing what you always do, which is bring in an extremely balanced perspective. And I appreciate that you bring up the risk of dismissing the mainstream perspective as well as people who might lean in an alternative direction. Um, and I love that you've brought in others that you've studied over the years who've been looking at telepathy and morphogenic fields. And I just so appreciate the humility you bring to the conversation as well. So I'll let you talk about the dog, but I just wanted to say thank you for those things, Matthew.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, having been it, I think it's having walked on all sides of it. I've been, I remember when my dad gave me a book. I'd finished university where I studied the more rigorous engineering sciences, and I left university and I kind of opened up to the work of Sheldrake and others. And then my dad sends me this book, and it's called Bad Science. And it's so this book all about why what I'm reading is just pseudoscience and all of that kind of stuff. And so we've had a good relationship development over the years in light of that. And to just live with a wife of mine that has so many experiences that are that are of a nature that has not been demonstrated by science, that is, and that is, it's beyond the need for proof. Once you experience it, it's undeniable, right? I like this.
You've really been straddling the worlds, Matthew.
Traveling the world is a good way to, to bring in that understanding of one another, and at the same time acceptance of one another. Because I used to resist, I used to push against so much before, was that reaction against it all, and and seeing how that would affect my path and yet opening up to it. Yeah. And I don't know if all this needs to be included in there, but yeah, thank you for
No, I think this is important because when we're talking about relationship, which we'll go deeper into eventually, we got to learn how to hold paradox.
Mm,
And which also means different perspectives. We can all be going through the same experience and have completely genuine, valid perspectives that are opposed to each other. Seem like we're living on different planets.
mm.
So thank you for modeling that for us. And okay, let's hear from the dog.
Yeah, and lastly, just on that, I think too, and we're talking about this world and the differing perspectives, is like two people can have such differing perspectives and yet still be in integrity with their values, and and being really truthful and standing in that. And then it's like we meet that in one another. Yeah. So I love this because this first straight away, this comes in brings in the term intelligence here. So we are dog. Coming in a myriad forms, our intelligence has entered more deeply into your lives, perhaps, than any other mammal. We are a sacrificial animal, for we hold a great deal of your ancestral pain in our hearts. It is because of this we serve you so loyally. We are a reminder of the power of family, alongside family, forgiveness. We entrust you, therefore, now with a sacred task. Go into your family and find the outcast members. This may even be you. You've just been talking, the people who've been dismissed, right? Find those people. In the great family, there are no outcasts, only misunderstandings. Your sacred task is to address the world within your own reality. Perhaps you find this wound to be beyond repair. All wounds can be healed in time. You may need to try a new approach. How would deep forgiveness approach this situation, this relationship? If you do not know where to begin, look again more deeply. Use the power of your intuition. Let the dog inside you sniff out the pain. Take great courage and move towards the pain. You need not fear the pain of another. You could see that being a block to telepathy, right? When we fear the pain of the other and not one, we can't open our hearts to those who are talking to us. Can we open our hearts to those, like these children that you're speaking of? Open your heart and let it speak words that must be spoken, words of healing. Draw upon the spirit of the dogs of the world. We can both protect you and open you up. We live within your heart with our wagging tails and smiling faces, and when needed, we will keep negative forces at bay. We'll see all things and people with equanimity. Approach your family, your community, your broken friendship with an open heart. Carry no expectations. Just approaching this wound is a deeply healing balm for your own soul. No matter what reception you get, try to understand the wound in the other. No one else's wound can inhibit your cheerfulness. You are your own person. You need not close down or push others away. You can maintain healthy boundaries without closing your heart. Here is the essence of your sacred task. Be the first to offer the branch of reconciliation. You need not fear rejection. Only you can reject your own heart.
Oh my God, Matthew. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as everyone will soon see as I keep sharing, that could not be more relevant. I just keep hearing, like, in the great family, there are no outcasts.
Mm-hmm.
Let the dog inside sniff out the pain, move towards it, learn to be with and understand the pain of others, approach others with an open heart and no expectations. We are our own person, right? It's wow. I hope others are feeling this as profoundly as I am. Thank you. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for bringing in Gracie and the dog and initiating us, bringing in an animal guide for this talk.
Well, thank you for intuiting it as well, because I was going to go just to the oracle, but for you to feel that, because I did click on the oracle anyway, and it was intuition. So I'm like, okay, we're just going to go with the dog of Rosie's intuition here.
Oh
So
my God.
uh,
Perfect.
just for it to come in and for it to be one that's been studied in telepathy, it makes
Yeah.
sense. Let's If they've got this quality, I mean, that's the work of the dream arc, isn't it? We look at these qualities these instincts that we see in another being, and what can we learn from them? So if dogs are
Yes.
telepathic, let's pay attention to them.
Yes. And I love that, it's the intuition with the family, with the relationship, right? Which is what we're really going to be focusing on now as we kind of move into the second half of our conversation. Um, so bringing in that dog, bringing in the spirit of the dog and Grace. Um, I'll just share a little bit about the relating sphere from the Star Pearl perspective. And if you're not familiar, the Star Pearl is a newer Gene Keys program that helps us bring harmony and balance into all aspects of our lives in a very real and practical way. And there's a star, right? So one of the six, and like on each point, there's a sphere. So on one of the six spheres or points is called the relating sphere. And this is the place where all of our ideals about relationships meet the actual, a lot of the time, very messy, but also quite beautiful reality, right? Of actually being human together. So, this is where we can get triggered. This is where our oldest and deepest wounds and traumas can resurface. It's where our fear of being open and vulnerable, of being like the dog, truly trusting another, only then to be let down and abandoned or abused. It's where all of that kind of bubbles up to the surface. And it's also where our deepest longings live, right? Our longing to be loved and to be held and to be truly seen for who we are. But for many of us, that longing to be seen often comes with a fear of being judged or attacked or envied or maybe taken advantage of or competed with or placed on some great pedestal only to get like dragged back down again when we just turn out to be human beings, right? So the shadow associated with the relating sphere is dishonesty. And I'm not just talking about lying to other people, right? It's about lying to ourselves. And for those of us who've done a lot of inner work, dishonesty can show up in increasingly kind of sneaky and subtle ways through minimizing or maybe deflecting or avoiding or rationalizing or over pleasing or blaming or martyring ourselves. I know that one. And sometimes, like, the biggest lie that we can tell ourselves is something like, I'm not enough, or I'm not lovable, or I'm not worthy. I don't deserve to be loved or respected. I don't deserve to be happy, right? These are all lies that we tell ourselves, consciously or unconsciously. But of course, in Gene Keys, there's always a treasure to be found in the shadow, right? So beneath or within all of that dishonesty, however it happens to show up in our lives, is a potential for intimacy. And according to the relating sphere of the star pearl, and in many of our lived experiences, the path to intimacy requires transparency. And when I say transparency, I'm not talking about just like that, like just oversharing. I'm talking about lovingly curated and courageous honesty that begins with ourselves and is connected to the heart, right? That's where that heart math comes in, and then flows outward towards others. And Richard has many times reminded us that just because we're being honest doesn't mean we can't also be kind. And I was also thinking that my wonderful spiritual counselor, Pasha Hogan, often reminds me to be kind, but not to be so nice. And that's been a hard one for me because I've often confused those two things. And I've learned, and I'm still very much learning, that when I'm too focused on being nice, I can end up being very unkind to myself, which does not serve anybody in the end. So, okay, so this is the hard part. So, yeah, so this is a bit of a hard moment for me, but I thought I would take this time to share a real life personal example of how the relating sphere is alive and in process in my world right now. So there are some of you who might already have heard this, but others of you might be hearing this for the first time. But very recently, I made a difficult and in many ways heartbreaking decision, which is to step away from my role as head of the Dream Arc within the Gene Keys business and to step forward into a new chapter of my life that's going to bring even more into the forefront something I've been working on for some time, which is called the Universal Love Curriculum. I've shared about it before. It might be new to some of you, but the curriculum is a love-centered philanthropic project that I've been working on together with an amazing team, which is deeply inspired by the Gene Keys and the Dream Arc, but is not part of the Gene Keys business itself. Okay, so if you asked me, like maybe just even a month ago, if I would ever consider leaving my role at the Gene Keys and in relation to the community, this community, I would have just like laughed in your face. Because as Matthew knows, as some of you know, I have literally lived and breathed the Dream Arc for years. And I have been and still am so incredibly devoted to this work, to Matthew, my beloved partner, and to all of you. But the truth is that a lot has been shifting inside the Gene Keys company for some time, and there are some new priorities, new directions, new needs to surf the larger collective waves of change with agility and grace. And all of the changes happening at the company are completely understandable and in many ways super exciting. There are lots of amazing programs and projects that are coming down the pike. And at the same time, these shifting priorities mean that the Dream Arc is going to need to take a back seat in terms of growth and expansion, which has been my main area of passion and responsibility. Now, of course, the Dream Arc is still going to be available as a beloved self-study course. Matthew's going to keep hosting our Dream Pod calls and do wonderful transmissions like these. And I'm looking forward to being an honored guest in the future. But for me, the changes that are taking place at the Gene Keys have made it harder for me to see a path forward for myself where I'd be able to feel creatively empowered or full-hearted, wholehearted in my work. And as much as I've wanted to stay, and I really did, and I still do, I have really had to get honest with myself, and ask myself things like, what do I actually want to devote my life to? And what kind of environment, what kind of conditions do I need in order to serve and create and collaborate with integrity and joy? So over these past weeks, I've had to really listen to my body, listen to my intuition, listen to my values, and to face the harder to deny truth that maybe something that I have loved with my whole being was coming to completion. And maybe something new is ready to emerge, a path with more flow and creative freedom and more spaciousness, more alignment, and maybe a new, more balanced way of living, right? I mean, I'm sure Matthew can testify. I've just been working nonstop for years and years. But, this has not been easy, as you can tell. There have been days where I haven't been able to speak at all. I've just been crying. And there have been moments like now when I've known that I need to find the right words and to share what's happening, which means discerning between what I need and desperately want to say and what actually needs to be said. And I've needed, and I still need to sense like when sharing something might actually make a difference in the outcome, and when it's more important that I just accept and surrender to the reality that I'm facing. So this has been like a full on serenity prayer time for me. And one of the hardest parts has been like once I've reached relative clarity about what I need to do, is like finding a way and the right place and the right time to share in a way that's like truthful and loving and constructive with all my relations, all the people that I care about, with my beloved Dream Arc community, right? Because my natural instinct is, probably some of you who know me have picked up by now, is to be pretty open and transparent, like especially with the people I work with, especially with all of you. My personal style, my teaching style has always been like, how can I use my own life as a way to demonstrate how the Gene Keys and Dream Arc wisdom can be embodied, by a real human being, lots of challenges, lots of flaws. But I've also had to think about the company, which I feel so loyal to, so what might feel right for me to share personally or even as a teacher might not necessarily be what's best for the business as a whole. And then there's the reality that most of you are incredibly sensitive beings, right? You pick up on things, on energies, emotional nuances, frequencies, like what we were talking about earlier. And even if I said nothing and just kind of faded into the distance after some official public announcement went out, you feel that, right? You'd be wondering, like, what the hell happened to Rosie? Like, how could she be so full on Dream Arc one minute and just, kind of disappear the next? And even if I had shared my decision, like, just in a positive light, like, hey, I'm off to do this next really exciting thing, without acknowledging the grief that I'm also feeling, you would sense something is off. And the truth is that if I even managed to give you like the impression that I really did leave like with a sense of lightness in my heart, and just because I felt like doing something else, like that would have been a true dishonesty for me. That would have been the real dishonesty, because the truth is always more nuanced, right? It's that, yes, this is an exciting launch for me. And yes, this is a devastating loss for me. So I feel sad and I feel excited and I feel scared and I feel curious and I feel free and I feel loved and I feel totally alone and I feel empowered and vulnerable and blessed. And I have major waves of FOMO coming up as I contemplate not being able to like closely collaborate with you, Matthew, like, and gather together with the people that I've worked with, people who've been my dearest friends for so many years. And all of that is true, right? That's this paradox holding that we're talking about. So, in the spirit of the relating sphere and in honor of your sensitive hearts and my need to acknowledge the essence of what is true for me, I'm naming all of this now. And I'm actually kind of proud of myself for honoring my mixed bag of truth and for choosing to live a full hearted life and for having the courage to let go of something I have loved so profoundly for so long in the face of so much uncertainty, so little security. And yeah, I'm also excited to have this opportunity to nourish and to have a way to like nurture and grow the Dream Arc and the community of people that it can magnetize through the Universal Love Curriculum, which is going to bring the essence of the Dream Arc and the Gene Keys to children around the world. Like I said, I've been working on this for years with an amazing team. And now I'm not going to also be working more than full time with the Gene Keys. So I can give it so much more of my heart and energy and attention. And I'm also looking forward, Matthew knows this too, to devoting more love and attention to the wisdom keepers from the Oracle deck who've been like patiently waiting for me over these past 6 or 7 years where I've been all Dream Arc focused, waiting for me to come home to them, to steward them, to help them come out into the world and have their impact. And actually, Matthew and I are planning a trip for me and the Wisdom Keepers to go to British Columbia in September. And I'm just looking forward to finding new ways to stay creatively connected with you, Matthew, and with the Gene Keys and all the people I love at the Gene Keys in the time ahead. And I'm very open to all kinds of collaborations arising. So all of this that I'm sharing is the relating sphere in action, right? And so a really dear friend of mine once told me that whenever we communicate, we're usually motivated by one or more of like three motivations: the desire to create harmony, the desire to stand in self respect, or the desire to get what we want. And most of the time, all three motivations are operating at the same time, right? Which isn't always comfortable or easy. And when that happens, it can be very helpful. Like a really good challenge is to ask yourself, like, what's most important right now, right? Is it harmony, even if it means I don't fully speak my truth? Is it self-respect, even if it might stir up things in my environment, in my relationships? Uh, or is it about getting what I want, even if that means holding my tongue? Or the opposite, like facing a possible confrontation or an uncomfortable interaction. So these are not easy questions, but they're really worth asking. And really, like, ask yourself, like, what's your default, right? Like, so my default motivation in my life in general, based on my nature and my conditioning, has pretty much been harmony, right? Always, harmony above all else. But over these past years, life has been asking me to stretch out of that communication comfort zone, right? To put sometimes self-respect first, right? Or to clarify what it is that I want, to speak up even, when I'm afraid of what might happen if I do, even when it's hard. And I've also been learning this paradoxical lesson that sometimes in life it's important not to speak up, not because I'm avoiding conflict, but because something else matters even more to me, right? So that might be the restoration of a loving family after a divorce, right? Or an ongoing collaboration that I really believe in, or receiving the blessing around a bigger vision. So in those moments, I'm learning to hold back, not out of dishonesty, but out of a devotion to a deeper truth. So what am I saying? I guess I'm saying that navigating the relating sphere is not always simple. It's not always clean. It's often messy. It's layered. It's confusing. It takes time and trial and error to land in real soul integrity. And I really want to invite you, Matthew, and anybody listening to ask yourself, what is your go-to communication motivation? And where are you being invited to stretch? And of course, given today's larger theme, let's not forget that communication isn't just about words, right? It's about presence, it's about energy. Think about how dogs, think about how animals communicate. They don't pretend, they're not performing, they're not political, they just are. And they might be quiet or loud, but they're never dishonest. And I believe that the new human, just like the children who are going to be immersed in the universal love curriculum, are going to learn from the animals. And I'm holding the vision of all of us learning to communicate with our presence, not from our wounds, right? But from the heart math. And in every interaction, we're going to have these opportunities to like shift and uplift the field of relating between us. Because when we speak from the inside out with our presence, with transparency, like the just right amount, which is very hard to do, and with love, we're not just talking, we're actually transmitting something new into the world and kind of laying the foundational groundwork for this new human to arrive. So, Matthew, that was a lot. And I would just love to give you a chance to share from your own truthful heart, because obviously my change, my transition is going to impact you and your work and your life and your relationship with the Dream Arc and our community in a big way. So if there's anything your relational heart wants to share before we offer some of the questions for contemplation for the people who are going to be coming to our upcoming community call, I would love to hear it.
Yeah, just big thank you, Rosie, on so many fronts, and just the thank you for your sharing so vulnerably here and honoring your truth in this. And I have been witness to parts of this process, and I know a lot of it you've had other support for as well. And it's just, it is such a deep test of this work of relating with one another. And I hear that too in those three aspects of the harmony of what I want and the self-respect. And I really think in this process I've heard you bring to attention each of those. And I know that it feels like it's stretched you, and I think it is stretching us all. And interestingly enough, the gene key that is in my relating sphere is about this whole process of death and letting go. And so it has been an honor in such a way for me to be witness to your process of letting go and allowing that full letting go, and at the same time not letting you fully go, because there will be absolutely it's a change of form. You're still your commitment to the transmission is so powerful, it's so integral, and you will continue to do that. And though it's changing form, I know that it's just only going to magnify through your work with the Universal Love Curriculum. And the Dream Arc has, the Dream Arc is all about this creative freedom, and it's going to give you that. And I feel that. And so I know the challenge of saying goodbye in this one form, but you're going to be continue to be brought in different ways with our community. And I just know that this is an opportunity, yeah, for the wisdom keepers to shine, for the ULC to shine, and for you to shine in that creative freedom as well. So I'm deeply grateful for our connection and relationship, and it is a letting go. There has been a grieving, there has been a sadness there of letting go, and there is a trust of where it's going to continue to grow and blossom in different ways, in new ways. And so for me, it has been, you know, holding this and witnessing this in such at a time when the world is going through such a powerful death process and a dying of the old and the old ways, and allowing for this new way to be birthing. And you carry such an intimacy and transparency in who you are that is so appreciated by our community. So I feel like I'm speaking on behalf of many in our community at this time who've really loved your transmissions each and every time we come on, and that you've shared from the heart, and that you haven't held back, and that you've held a space of, I've the person you are and the compassion you have for every soul. I have seen you moved by so many stories, so many people. So like the dog says, in this message, it's like this you are not an outcast from the Gene Keys in any way. You are a big part. I used to hold this story. This is actually one of the things that brought me into the Gene Keys team in the first place, was letting go of my self-identity as some kind of outcast. And it happened to be at about the same time that my beautiful doggy came along, right? So I can really resonate with this message through and through. And it yeah, it's like you're being brought into the fold in a new way, and you're getting to express in a different way. And I know it hasn't been easy for you, any part of this, and the choices haven't been easy. And at the same time, no matter how difficult it's been for you, you've always listened to your heart in this. And that relates so much to our community. That communicates so much to our community of your integrity and your values in that way. And that it is, it's being done in such a way that we can continue to collaborate. We can continue to collaborate. The Gene Keys and you can continue to collaborate. And I know that in this process, there will be more shares from you, Richard, myself, just as like what this is going to look like for the community. And it's certainly not going to look like Rosie's disappeared. We may not see her as often in the Dream Arc, but you'll be able to connect with her in the many other myriad ways that she is going to be serving the world and this Gene Keys and Dream Arc transmission. So, um, yeah, it's been such a joy to work with you. I'm so grateful for everything that you brought my way in these last few years of working with the Dream Arc. And uh and Gracie is just, I don't know if you can hear her, she's just letting go. She's my little shamanic dog. Whenever there's, so if there's energy moving, she will move it out with me. So yeah, I think you need to know how deeply appreciated you are by so many. And that I know Richard, Elijah, Sally, and other all the rest of the Gene Keys team, we're gonna find the ways that we can continue to collaborate and in this time of big change. So yeah, relating sphere. It's sometimes really challenging to relate those things, and you did it so well today. And just the gift, the city of the one that I work with is this celebration. So it is this city of celebration, and I celebrate you and the everything that you showed here, the joy, the sadness, the tears, the laughter. It's all part of what you've brought here today. So I think that's the end of my sharing for this moment. But just that was a beautiful example of the integrity of our relating. That the shadow of this key can be our lack of integrity, and the gift of this gene key is our integrity. And so yeah, thank you, Rosie. And community, this isn't the end of with her. It's just changing form.
Yeah. And for the Gene Keys fans, my life's work is the 47, which is the gift of transmutation. That's also in my creativity sphere. So it's all about transmuting, suffering into grace, into beauty, transmuting one project into a related but different, more free, loving project. And
Mhm.
so this is me doing my transmuting work in a very awkward human way, and
She's
then in
actually
my own.
told very graciously.
Okay.
Graciously. That's her evolution gene key is the 22, graciousness. And I'm sure many people can relate that graciousness in you. I even see it
Hope
with
so.
the wisdom keeper to the right of you. There is Grace, I believe.
Yeah, that's true. I always have heard
Yeah,
it there.
there's Grace right there. What's it?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And also in my relating sphere is the 18. It is about integrity, and line 2 about communicating with integrity. And so I feel that I've been really working that, like how to communicate about this with integrity. So
Mhm.
anyway, Matthew, thank you. Thank you for everything. And I know it's not a goodbye, but I really love and cherish you, and I really want the community to support your next chapter as well.
Mhm.
Matthew is just like such an inspiration to me, and I know he is for all of you too. So just bless Matthew on his journey as well. He's doing great things everywhere, both inside the Gene Keys and out. And I can't wait to experience more of your embodied wisdom, your mastery of embodied wisdom in all the different venues, both local and online. And I'm really excited to get to experience your home and your location, your dream arc
Come on,
life with the
Vancouver Island.
woodpeckers.
Yeah, I was gonna say, wait for the dream arc is waiting for you here on Vancouver Island with all the
Yes,
different creatures.
yes.
We will be taking a good tally of what creatures show up on your path.
Oh, I can't wait. I can't wait. And then also just a little thing, and we'll probably, like you say, we're going to be talking about this kind of dripping out in different ways this month. But um, for those of you who are interested in the Oracle deck project and you want to know when that's going to happen, I just want to say the company is working very, very hard to make that happen. And there are so many different, factors that go into the decision around what can be prioritized and brought forward. But it has not been forgotten. It has not been dropped. And we're going to surrender to the right timing. We've done everything we can. It's ready to go when the time is right. So we're going to surrender to divine timing around that. So and I'm sure we'll keep you posted. And I'm sure when it does get published, I'll come back on the scene and celebrate that with all of you.
Oh, you absolutely will be. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
You and Richard will be doing a tour of that in some way, and
yeah.
online at least. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Um, so Matthew, we have questions we want to ask people to get ready for the Dream Pod call, or just anybody who was interested in contemplating. But was there anything you wanted to share before we share those questions?
At the time of this recording, the gazelle is the gazelle is always the announcement that we want to notify people about, because if
Yeah.
you're somebody who's curious about the dream arc, hasn't dived into it, the gazelle is a great way It's our bi-monthly newsletter. It's a great way to be able to explore the themes of the dream arc and activate it a little bit in your consciousness and get a taste for it. And so the current gazelle or the upcoming gazelle is related to tricksters, the theme of tricksters. The dream arc is full of tricksters who
Yeah.
bring us the unexpected. And, perhaps this call today in some way was a little bit of trickster unexpected for you, as it has been for many of us. And so the gazelle is one thing definitely to mention. If you are somebody who's new to it, I definitely can recommend, you'll see a link below for the Jaguar's Journey, which is another great way to enter into the body of work of the dream arc and explore and experience some of its playfulness as the jaguar takes you through the jungle, the desert, the ocean, and the night. And we're loving hearing the reflections of people who've been journeying through the jaguar's journey. So those are two of the main things that I would mention at this time. There's always ways to stay connected to the dream arc. We hold twice per month. We hold clubhouse calls where anybody can join, whether you have the dream arc or not. And it could be a good way to explore the animal synchronicities and dreams that people are having. And then we always have our monthly Dream Pod calls, where those of you who own the Dream Arc course are welcome to join us in a place of sharing, where we get to have these kinds of open and vulnerable and connecting shares about our experiences and work with the Dream Arc. So those invitations are there monthly, and they will continue. And from time to time, Rosie will come back and join our Dream Pod calls, and we'll say hello on Clubhouse. And
Yes. And Instagram too. Like we've got a couple more coming before I make my transition.
that's right.
And yeah, we have one more in this series that we're gonna do. So this is not the last. And then of
Not the
course, as
last of
Matthew
Rose.
says, he's gonna invite and you're gonna invite me in,
Yes,
and I will
coming.
find ways to stay connected.
Absolutely.
Thank you, sweet Matthew.
So you want to got some questions for us?
Yeah. Okay, let me do it. So
Oh,
interesting
shadow
life,
there.
right?
It's open. Yeah.
I tell you, like this whole thing about like how to be open and vulnerable, but we still have a job to do. That is that. Okay. So the first question is, okay, I have my notes over here.
And we'll make
So
sure these are in the below the video as well.
yes, yes. So and I've changed these a little bit. Okay, so take a look at your most familiar and least familiar motives when you're communicating with others. So to what extent are you driven by the desire to create harmony, to assert self-respect, or to get what you want? And where in your life are you feeling called to stretch in your relational communication realm? So that's the first, right? Like where could you be even more truthful to others or with yourself? Okay. The next is how have you learned or how are you learning to create a safe space for others so that they feel comfortable enough to speak vulnerably in your presence? And where are the areas where you could cultivate that capacity even more? Like, how can you be a safe space for the vulnerable and true expression of others? And then finally, what's your experience with telepathy or those unexplainable intuitive connections? Like, is this something you want to develop more? Is this something you've actually always had, but you kind of kept in the closet? Is this something you experience with your pet, with your dog? Anything that arises for you. So those were the three questions that I thought would be interesting for people to explore.
Mm,
Does that
beautiful.
sound okay? Do you want to add another one or are those okay?
No, every time you ask a question, though, it stimulates more thoughts and
Yes.
stories and everything like that. But I'll leave those for another time.
Yeah.
But
Well, that's good. That means they're working.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this piece about telepathy especially is going to open up for a lot of people more and more over the years, and recognizing, yeah, if we're in relationships with others and if our walls are still there, if we're not allowing ourselves to be intimate with others in a vocal way, can we really step beyond the void to allow ourselves to be intimate with others in non-vocal and non-local ways?
Mm,
Mm,
beautiful.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosie.
So is this time? Do we say farewell for now?
Farewell for now. Adieu. Until next time. Bye, everybody.
Okay.
Thank you.